So Luke Ross has launched version 9.0 of his R.E.A.L VR mod. And that version includes 2 games that utilizes alternate eye rendering, AER2, for NVIDIA GPUs. Now, AMD is coming, I'm sure, but for now, it's just NVIDIA. If you don't know what AER is, it's a technique to get the game to show up in your VR headsets in full VR by alternate image flashing really fast back and forth between each eye. This is a non-programmer way of explaining it. But anyway, when that happens, it essentially cuts the frame rates you would get playing the game flat on your monitor in half inside the headset. So if you're getting 90 frames per second on your monitor, you would only be getting 45 frames per second inside the headset, which for VR is not ideal. But, you know, beggars can't be choosers, so those of us hardcore VR fanatics have been willing to put up with this just to play amazing AAA games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Final Fantasy VII Remake in VR. Another problem is this process creates a few visual disturbances like haloing around characters when they're up close, or ghosting around characters and objects if they're not moving directly towards you or away from you. Once again, not ideal, but hey, you know, for me, Cyberpunk 77 and VR. So, and really after a while of dealing with it, you get used to it, so you don't really even notice it anymore. But with AER2, Luke has worked some kind of magic using something called space warp, without going into all that technical speak about how it works or what it does, because really I don't know. but simply it doubles the frame rates. So theoretically, you should have no more issues with ghosting, and if you can get your PC to handle a steady 90 frames per second, then in the headset it should feel like you're getting 180 frames per second. So I've been really excited about this, anticipating it for a while, and after this mod launched, and after streaming Final Fantasy VII, and then spending the last 2 days testing the game in different configurations on my PC. By the way, I've been using 2 PCs, a 2080 Super with an i9 10900K and 32 gigs of RAM, and of course the Beast Machine, which is a RTX 4090 with an i9 13900K and 32 gigs of RAM. But we'll get to more on that. But right out of the box, I want to state the obvious. The more powerful the machine, the better your experience is going to be. That's just the way it is. So in this video, I'll be going through not only the differences and what to expect, but a step-by-step guide to get the best possible experience you can have with the machine that you're running the game on. Now, please know that AER2 is in its infancy, and Luke will be working his butt off, I'm sure, to add more games and improve what he started with. But this is where we're starting for now, and I think this is really exciting. So anyway, first I'm going to start with the somewhat bad news, so we can move on and end with the good news. And that's the 2080 Super and alternating eye rendering 2. Now, in order to get good results, from what I have found, is you need that your frames per second to be at least 60 frames per second on your desktop, which would equal 120 frames per second in your headset with AER2 on half settings. By the way, you can have either half setting or third setting. The third setting is more for the lower end graphics cards. So I played around with this quite a bit in order to get that 60 frames per second. You need to first set your textures and shadows to low, and honestly guys, the lack of graphical settings in this game on PC is criminal. It feels like I'm playing like just a console. All you have, you'll see when you look, but those are your graphical settings you need to worry about, is your textures and your shadows. You need to drop your resolution down to at least 1696 by 1696, but even then, when you move your head and move around, there are a ton of graphical distortions, and it just made it really hard to play and look at. The most stable I could get it was dropping the resolution down to 1344 by 1344, and then when you move your head around, everything seems smooth, and it held at a steady 60 frames per second, which is 120 frames per second in the headset, so that's really good. The catch is everything is super blurry. because your resolution is so low. And with that, there's very significant halo artifacts around everything that's 3D. So I changed the AER2 settings to a third instead of a half. Then I was able to bump the resolution up to 1696 by 1696 and have a pretty stable experience, but still very blurry and a lot of artifacts. So then I went back to Legacy AR, which is the old alternate eye rendering, and I was able to take the resolution up to a 2160 by 2160, and I had 75 to 80 frames per second. Now granted, that's only 40 frames per second in the headset, but everything looked so much clearer. I personally liked that better. I've spent a ton of hours in the R.E.A.L mod, and I'm very used to that. So for me at least, if I was playing on a 2080 Super machine, I would just stick with the Legacy alternate eye rendering and forego the AER2 for now. But you could try them both out for yourself and see which you prefer. So like I said before, the more powerful machine, the better experience you're going to have. And I just don't know if anything lower than and I'm not even sure about a 3060 Ti, but you're definitely anything below that. I think you're just better off going with Legacy for right now. Maybe Luke will fix that. Maybe I'm getting something wrong, but I don't think so, because that's the only things I could change. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. Alternate eye rendering on the RTX 4090. This was absolutely amazing. Now, when I first tested the game, I had my index refresh rate set to 144 Hz and had done nothing but install the mod and play. With AER2 on a half, I tested all of these from the beginning Scorpion boss battle. So I tried bumping the resolution up past what the default resolution Luke has, which I think is like 2462 by 2462 or something like that, something in that range. But I had some pretty noticeable frame drops and skipping, so I went back to that default resolution. And the entire boss fight, I held a pretty stable 120 frames per second. It was between 118 and 120 most of the time. Occasionally would drop down to 108 frames per second, but that was a blip, and then it would go right back up to 120. And that was very seldom that actually happened. So at that res with AER2, we're talking about 240 frames per second in the headset, and without saying, smooth as silk, just absolutely stunning. Geez, if you think even without AER2, I'd still be getting around 60 frames per second in the headset. And from what I'm used to with AER, that would still be a big improvement, because usually I'm probably around 40, to be honest. So that's pretty awesome. The ghosting was pretty much gone, although I did notice some around the handle of Cloud's sword and body when I would rotate the camera around him at this resolution. There's a pretty prominent haloing around the characters, but it's very transparent and it's hard to see in low lit areas. But when you're outdoors in like bright lit or sunlit areas, it's very striking. And so at this point, I was a little bit disappointed because I really wanted to bump my resolution up. Elliot from Flat to VR. Oh, by the way, if you have not followed Flat to VR on Twitter and joined their Discord, do it. The link's in the description. There's tons of info on mods there. Very, very helpful community, and that's where you're going to get all of this great stuff. So anyway, Elliot pointed out to me that the whole point of AER2 is that you can get those high frame rates from a lower refresh rate. So you could spare some GPU for higher resolutions and settings. Thank you, Elliot. So I set the index refresh rate to 90 Hz. And then I went in my textures and shadows to high, those graphic settings, and I maxed the resolution in the game to 2976 by 2976, and I got a steady 90 frames per second. The graphics quality was crystal clear, and everything felt like it was running at 180 frames per second. It was beautiful. There was still noticeable halo at the higher res. If I could get it to a higher res than 2976, that should all but eliminate that. But you just can't go any higher in the game. although everything was super crisp and clear, the colors felt a bit washed out and things didn't have that same feeling of depth or seem as real for whatever reason. Once again, Elliot comes to the rescue and he pointed me towards a guide that he put together, also link in the description, that improves all of this with a free app called Flawless Widescreen that lets you bump up the game resolution beyond the in-game res without breaking the shadows, a high-resolution texture pack from Nexus, and some tweaks with Reshade. After doing all of this, I was able to get the resolution up to 3156 by 3156 at 90 frames per second, which would be 180 frames per second in the headset. I had great contrast and rich colors, those high-def textures. It was just French kiss. There's still some slight artifacting, like before when I rotate the camera around cloud, but not near as bad. And the haloing is all but gone. Honestly, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in VR. And I cannot wait to get AER2 for Cyberpunk 2077. So, let's get to the guide part of this video. The first thing, of course, that you need to do is buy and install the game. Now, you can look around for sales. It's not a cheap game, but sometimes you can find it for around half off. Make sure you type in -DX11 in your launch options on Steam. In your Epic Store, click on your account icon and then click on Settings and then scroll down to the game. Click that and then click additional command line arguments and then type in DXL11 and you're good. Head on over to Luke Ross's Patreon and get yourself a copy of his mod version 9.0. Extract all the files of that mod RAR into your game folder containing the 64-bit exe for Final Fantasy. For me, it's D Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, end, binaries, Win64. Once those are extracted, go into your Win64 file and double-click on the R.E.A.L config bat file. And follow the prompts, the program will run and it'll close itself down and you're good to go. When you launch Final Fantasy VII Remake, it should start up in your headset. For the record, I've just been launching from the Epic Game Launcher and I've had no issues. If you have a game on Steam, I would recommend that you just start Steam VR and then launch the game from your desktop. Or if it's Oculus, start up the PC version of your Oculus Home software and once again start from your desktop. If the game crashes on your startup, make sure that your NVIDIA drivers are updated. And then you just make sure all of this is working. And then you can close out and close the game down again and we'll get the other fixes in. Alright, next let's talk about Flawless Widescreen. Let's head over to this page, just download it, and you run the executable. Pick Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it should show you a screen that looks like this. A quick note, if you do not have a monitor that runs 4K, you may have to use your NVIDIA control panel to add a custom resolution. If you don't do this, this program will crash the game with a fatal error. So, let's go over that for a second because I had to do that. Right click on your desktop, pick desktop settings and then NVIDIA control panel. If you don't see NVIDIA control panel, just type it into your start bar and it should pop right up. Now you'll see this screen. If there's no option for 4K, you can create a custom resolution. First go over to the left and click Manage 3D Settings. Then go down to DSR Factors and make sure that nothing is checked so it says off. Then you can go back to Change Resolution and there will be a clickable Customize button down at the bottom of the resolution window. For me, I tried typing in 2560 by 1440 for a res, but it wouldn't let me do that because I'm playing on a 12-year-old 1080p TV. LOL. But I did type in 3840 by 2160 and that worked. And after that, the game booted up perfectly with the Flawless Widescreen open. Now, go into your game and make sure all the settings are on high, all those graphic settings. And if you have a card that can handle it, max that resolution. Click both thumbsticks in and it'll bring up your Real overlay. The first thing you'll see is a bunch of sliders with instructions on the left here that tell you what every button and stick and everything will do with these sliders. Don't do anything with that right now. These are things you can play with later, but it's not important. So simply hit the A button on your gamepad or X on your PS controller, and you'll now see the real part of your overlay mod. You'll see here that what you're running at FPS wise, like mine is 90, and to the right here you'll see your game resolution, and it's maxed, and to the right of that you'll see your render resolution. That's what you're actually seeing in your headset. So you can click and make changes real time, so it makes it pretty easy to find that sweet spot. What I did was I jumped in, I had my resolution slider set too high on the Flawless Widescreen app, so I was hitting my FPS hard. So to fix that, I just adjusted the sliders little bits at a time to the left to get it down to a point where when I moved my head, everything moved around me. It ran really nice and smooth, and I was getting a steady 90 frames per second. And so when I was done, my sweet spot was 3156 by 3156 rendered resolution. That was fantastic. That's more like it. Now, let's head over to Nexus and download this HD texture pack. To install this pack, I manually downloaded it. You need to put the file in the mods folder. So it's Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, End, Contents, Packs, and then Mods. Now I didn't have the mods folder, so I just added the game to Vortex, and then I had the mods folder. That's all you need to do. The last thing you'll want to do is add Reshade. So first thing you do is go into that Win64 file and copy the DXGI DLL. When I say Win64, I mean the one from your Final Fantasy where the EXE is. Copy that DXGI DLL and then put it somewhere not in that file. I just put it on my D drive. Then delete that file from inside the N64 file, or the N64, the Win64 file. Then go to Reshade and download the EXE and start it up. So you'll see it'll load up all of your games. Select the game from the list. For me, I had 2 Final Fantasy VII pop-ups, so I picked the Win64 version. That's what you want to do. You then pick DX11 and let that install. Then go ahead and skip this box. Then in this box, you'll see a button, Uncheck All up here. Click it. And then it says Check All. Click it again, and it'll select all those shaders, and then click Finish, and it's downloaded. You did it. So there's only 2 things that you want to use here. Well, you can play with all of them if you want. But first you got to take that DXGI DLL file that you place wherever. Well, for me it was on the D drive. And you put it back in that Win64 file. It'll ask you if you want to replace that file. Just click yes. Now jump back into the game. Now once in, click both your thumbsticks and bring up your Real overlay again. Hit A to bring back to your get out of your slider menu and bring up the Real thing, and then hold the X button on your gamepad, and then this little menu will pop up to the left of your overlay. I think it's a square button on the PS controller. Holding down the X button, use the left bumper to highlight the Reshade tabs. Now you should be able to see a list of all your Reshade shaders. All you want to use here are the curve shader, which bumps up your contrast and makes your colors pop and adds more depth. By the way, you could just adjust by highlighting this box down here. I took my contrast up to 75 and it looks amazing. And also the saturation shader. And there you go. You can download the shaders from Elliot's Guide under Reshade portion here. There's a link in the description. And that's it. Okay, whew, that was a lot, but you can see with these side-by-sides that there is definitely a difference between running on default res at 144 hertz and all the things that we've done here at 90 hertz. And like I said before, this is just the most gorgeous thing I've seen in VR to date. the future is bright for VR modding, man. And Luke Ross is an amazing pioneer, and he's lighting the way for all of us. So make sure you support him on his Patreon. It's only like $10 a month, and you're regularly getting new AAA games to play in VR. For me, that seems like a great deal, considering what you're paying for not AAA games. If you want, you can just pay once and get the mod, pay whenever you need updates. That way you can save some bucks. So anyway, big shout out to Luke, and also to Elliot Tate from Flat to VR for all the help that he gave me in getting this up to speed. I hope you found this helpful, and if you do and you'd like more Flat to VR guide videos, please drop a like and the subscribe, and then hit that little bell thingy, and let me know in the comments if you have any problems or questions. I may or may not have the answers, but if I don't, I can send you in the right direction. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Dr. Greg out.
Shit, the bomb!
20 minutes until detonation.
Ha! You hear that? Damn thing showed you how it's done.